Welcome to MageCasts.io. My name is Fabrizio Branca, and in this episode, I'd like to show you a Magento boilerplate that helps you get started with Magento and structure your Magento projects. So what I'm going to show you here is certainly not the only way to structure your projects, and I'm sure that there's many other ways ways out there that are also very good. But I'd like to show you what has worked very well for us, and yeah. So basically, the two main problems that this Magento boilerplate is trying to solve is we want to be able to create a build that's deployable without any manual interaction. So we need automated deployment. So everything that needs to go into setting up and installing a new deployment, a new environment, needs to be part of this build. And the second thing is we want everything to be reusable. As you know, in Magento 1, all the map modules are part of, are mixed in with all the other core files. And modman is a great solution to that. And we're going to use modman and composer to allow structuring a project in a way that allows us to easily update, remove, and add any component, including with Magento source, to allow easy updates and to allow reusing the modules in different projects. At the same time, of course, we can have project-specific modules that just live inside that project. Okay, so let's get started. I have prepared this Magento boilerplate repository, so you're very welcome to use this, to fork this, to make your own adaptations to that. This screencast is part of a series of many other screencasts. In future screencasts, I'm going to show how to create a build. I'm going to show how the environment settings tool works in detail. I'm going to show how to set up Jenkins and a continuous integration pipeline. So basically, this is the first step in how to structure a project so that later we can create a build from that and use that build to install it on your dev box, on your integration system, and on your production systems. So let's look at this boilerplate and let's look at the individual components. So as I mentioned before, we're using Composer here, and here is an example Composer file to get started with. So the idea of this boilerplate is actually that you would have your own, this is the skeleton Git repository for your project. So you would fork that or copy that. And this project, this repository itself will be probably pretty empty because all the components or most of the components actually used in your build are being pulled in from somewhere else. And this is mostly done by Composer. So here the Magento, the name of this project, of this demo project, is just simply Magento Boilerplate. And here are the components that we're using here. So Composer doesn't know anything about Magento. And there is this very popular Magento hackathon Composer installer project on GitHub that introduces Magento dash module package types so that the Composer knows what to do with the Magento module. This is a great project, but I feel that it's doing way too much. So that's why we created our own Magento Composer installer. And there's another project called Composer Installers that introduces different installers for different other projects. And basically, this is just a Magento flavor. This is super simple, as you can see here. Basically, it just reuses the base installer and tells Composer where these different packages should go to. So modman packages like Magento modules go to modman name, and the Magento source goes to htdocs. And this is also configurable. So that's basically it. That's what the Composer installer does. It's super lightweight. It will not set up the symlinks for you or copy things. We are still going to use modman for this. So the next thing is the environment settings tool, and I'll show that in this example later. The environment settings tool is a PHP standalone tool that's not specific to Magento, but has specific components for Magento that allow you to customize your Magento environment. So if you deploy your Magento project to your dev box, it most likely has very different URL parameters, database parameters, and maybe different payment provider settings. And there could be potentially a very long list of things that are different from one environment to another environment. And we call those settings. And this tool basically, based on a CSV file, traverses this file and adjusts those settings in your Magento installation. It can write values to XML files using an XPath expression. It can write files, update settings in the core config data file, but it also can simply replace markers in a file. So the next thing we're going to use here is a set of shell scripts, Magento deploy scripts. And we're only adding it to this project here, but there will be a separate screencast where I'm going to show the details about the deployment script, the installation script, and the build script. In this episode, we're only focusing on how to structure the Magento project itself, not thinking about how to create a build and how to install that yet. Then, as I mentioned before, you're not only pulling in all your modules, but you should also be pulling in the Magento source itself. So in this case, I'm using OpenMage Magento LTS, which conveniently already comes with the Composer JSON file. But of course, you're free to use your own sources here. If the sources don't have a Composer JSON file, you can add these settings inline in this Composer JSON file here. And of course, you can use this to pull in the Magento Enterprise sources from a private repository and everything else. And then here you would add all the modules that you'll be using. I just added two AOE modules as an example here. Again, those modules are registered on packages.com. .org, so that's why we don't need to add more sources here. But you most likely want to add the Magento packages URL, or if you have a private status installation, you might want to add that there. So Composer will be able to find those packages that are not registered on packages.org. But with as little as this, you can already get started. So we have another folder called Tools, where the environment settings tool and deployment scripts will add their binaries to. So everything you can do is sitting in the tools directory. So if we go back to the Magento boilerplate, actually let's look at the tools directory. And two files that are actually part of the parent skeleton projects are composer far and N98 made run far. Okay, so basically, as you can see, there is the modman directory, .modman, and there is this .base file, which is important because Magento, the Magento source, will be deployed to the root directory /htdocs. So that's an important thing to notice. The project root, which is this here, is not the web root. So we want all these things not to be exposed to the web. Instead, we have the subdirectory htdocs, which the web root points to, and that might be directly in your vhost configuration or nginx configuration, or through a symlink, and then your deployment strategy just updates the symlink. But in any case, it's not this directory, but it's the htdocs directory that is the web root. And in order to tell modman about that, we need this .base file that basically contains the relative path to the web root. So here you can see there's already a module that's part of this .modman directory, and there might be many more in your real project, because every module that's specific to a project that you're not planning on reusing, because it maybe the theme or whatever can go directly in this .modman directory. So there will be like a mix of modules living in this skeleton project that we're looking at right now, and modules being pulled in through Composer, and you would usually add those modules to the .gitignore file. So this boilerplate base module, in this case, isn't a real module at this point, but this will basically contain a local XML template file and also a HDXS template file. Later, this actually might turn into a real module when you have some generic things that you want to put into this. And you would most likely want to rename this to your actual project name _base. So boilerplate _base is just an example here. And with this kind of trick here, we are copying over the local XML template file into your project. And in order to make sure we don't do this over and over again, because the environmental settings tool might have done customizations to that file, we will create this extra .protect file, and only if this file is not there, we will actually copy the app etc local XML template file to your app etc local XML file, and then we will create this protect file as a flag. And we do the same thing with the htaccess file. So if we look into this app etc local XML file, here, this is basically just an empty skeleton again, because we will use the environment settings tool that I'm going to show later to fill in these gaps. Because all these values here, and maybe potentially more values over here, are environment specific. And in addition to that, this local XML file would live inside the htdocs folder, but we of course don't want to commit that to the Magento sources, especially if you're trying to use vanilla ones being pulled in from somewhere else. So this is why this file comes from the boilerplate base module and will be copied over and then customized using the environment settings tool. So then we have the configuration folder. So there's a number of files here, and I will talk about most of them in detail in future episodes. Let's have a quick look at the settings CSV file. So here you can see there is those different XML file handlers, and here is where for the DB name, host, password, username, we will inject for the environment called devbox those settings. Same thing is happening here with the URL and a couple of more parameters here. And again, I will go into details in a future episode. Then the other files that we're seeing here is the project.txt is basically the project name, which usually is like a lowercase name without any spaces that we also use. That's basically your project code. We would also use this as a prefix for project-specific modules that we would create. And this information is needed so that the deployment scripts know which project this is, because it might need that, the deployment script might need that to determine where to deploy this project to. Then the master system is basically a text file that indicates which of the environments is the current master environment. So that means that that tells the deployment scripts later which if we need to reset the database and copy it over from another environment, and that's when the so-called system storage comes in. The system storage is usually a nightly backup of the database and the media directory, and whenever we deploy to a new environment, if this is not the master system, we want to reset that environment to match the master system exactly. So we know, for example, if we deploy to the integration system, we can deploy that to a system that's as close as possible to the future production system. So then we have this tar excludes txt, and again, this is a detail. This is a file for the packaging process. This file basically defines which package goes into the base package and the so-called extra package. The base package is the files that are necessary to run the project. So we don't need a number of files here. We don't need any Git files. We also don't need access to the Magento Connect installer and all that stuff. But of course, if we deploy that to our devbox or even to the integration system where we would want to run the unit tests, we need a lot more files. And I'll show that when we talk about the build process. Okay, so we talked about the basic project. So now actually let's get started. You can get the code from GitHub. So let's just clone this repository here, git clone here. And I've already prepared a vhost that matches the paths here and a database with the database name, username, and password demo, like specified in the settings. So in here, first thing we need to do is we need to pull in the sources through Composer. And the steps that we're doing right now here, you will not be doing them manually in the future. It's literally only the first time when you set up the project, and it's of course also good to know what's happening behind the scenes. But later there is going to be an installer that does these things for you. So the Magento deploy scripts that I showed before comes with an install sh file that technically does exactly that. Runs Composer, runs modman, and does a couple of more things, and then the project is ready to be used. Okay, so that's it. Composer completed, pulling in all the modules. So now you can tell we have the separate htdocs folder that hasn't been there before. If you look inside the modman folder, we see AO scheduler and AO templatons being there, and of course the boilerplate base that we saw before. So htdocs here now is that's the raw vanilla Magento source without any customizations at this point. So let's first update the permissions, fix the permissions for all these files, and then we're actually going to run through the Magento installer. So of course you can skip this if you already have an existing Magento project with a database. But here, since we only started with the Magento sources, we don't even have a database, and so we just walk through the regular Magento installation wizard to kickstart the project, and then during this process, the local XML file will be generated. And but from then on, this local XML file will be deployed through the boilerplate _base. Okay, so that's it. We went through the Magento installer. If we now look into the file system, this local XML file here was created, but now of course this file is just sitting here in the Magento sources, and the next time we would check out our skeleton project and run Composer, this file wouldn't be there because the sources are coming from our vanilla Magento code. So this is why we would either copy this exact file over to our Magento boilerplate module, or in this case, this file is just a raw file, a very simple template here, so we're just going to reuse this one. So once you did that, basically the next step would be to run modman to deploy all the modules, to put them in place. So we can see here now scheduler and templatons are being installed, and the boilerplate base is actually now copying over the local XML file and the htaccess file. So now you can see, for example, with the htaccess file, we have the htaccess file that's coming from the boilerplate _base module, and then there is this htaccess protect file, which contains a timestamp, and this is basically only the flag that that lets us know that we already copied over the htaccess file. Because now the next thing we would do is we would run the environment settings tool. So this is tools apply.php, then the environment name, and then the path to the settings CSV file. So devbox and ..configuration settings CSV. So now this file will traverse the settings CSV file, and as you can see here, it will insert the value. So this value was empty before because remember we copied it from the boilerplate base local XML template file, and so now it customized this to demo, localhost demo. Also, it's deleted all the URL files because there was a row in the settings CSV file, and now it adds the current the actual URL that we defined in the settings CSV. And again, that's a classic example of what's probably going to be different from your dev box compared to the integration and, of course, the production system. And instead of deploying a package and then remembering to go in and manually change these settings, or you might not even have this problem because you never sync the databases, which is probably an even worse idea. This settings tool will help you to keep track of this, so there's literally nothing to remember after deploying because everything should be happening automatically. And another thing we're going to do here is in the htaccess file that we just deployed, that we copied over, there's this # dev marker that will insert a snippet here that for your dev box, and again, only for your dev box, will enable displaying errors and the Mage Developer mode. Okay, so now, of course, you're totally fine to start developing a project. So you would add new modules here. A classic good setup would be to now have your project name _ template module that comes with all the theme stuff, and or other basic customizations for the front end stuff. And then you might have more project-specific modules that all would go in here. And of course, you will most likely end up pulling in a lot more modules and add them to your Composer JSON file. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was useful for you. Watch out for the next episodes where I'm going to explain all the other related parts, and I hope this is going to make a lot more sense to you when you see how to create an actual build file out of this structure, and how to deploy this build to your production system, and also to your dev box and to any other environment. Bye bye. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.